we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
We're your hosts, Rick Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
In each episode, we bring you meaningful conversations with vegan changemakers that remind us progress is possible, even in a world full of bad news.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Vegan Compass podcast. Today we have a really special episode for you. We're going to dive deep into the life and legacy of Christine Townend, who sadly passed away last year. But we have two very special women, her colleagues and friends, Lynda and Glenys Oogjes, who are going to tell us more about her amazing life and all of the work that she did for animals in Australia and overseas as well. How are you today, Rick?
I am very well. It's been rather a busy day. How's your day been?
Also busy.
Okay, well, I've got to say I've been looking forward to doing this podcast episode. When it was just after Forum, I think we decided we'd do this.
Yes.
I've been looking forward to it ever since. And I feel really honoured today because we have two of the people who I just love dearly. I admire them so much. They're both incredible inspirations here for me.
Me too.
I've been so looking forward to talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to start off with our signature question with a slight little twist today. So it's about Christine. Who was she and what did she do?
That glorious woman achieved so much in her lifetime in so many different facets. She was just pivotal in the animal rights movement back in 1976. She was such an accomplished artist. She had such a way of painting that you always knew a Christine Townend work. She got a PhD. She became Dr. Christine Townend. Her poetry was exquisite. And she was just a Renaissance woman. She did it all, and she had such courage and such tenacity, and she went where angels feared to go, and she was the forerunner for a lot of things.
And can I just say, I'm just so pleased to be able to talk about Chris. Both Lynda and I known Chris for so many decades, knew Chris for so many decades. Myself, it wasn't until the early 1980s, actually, but Chris had been already working and trailblazing before that. But when I ever remember of Chris, I think of just a calm, beautiful woman who things ran deep with her, and she was, a quiet achiever. I know that's a cliche thing to say, but I really feel it. Just a gentle woman, both family, in the organisations that she helped form, which we'll talk about, of course, in her gentle way, with trying to change the world, such as her work in India, which we'll also talk about. I was inspired by her, and indeed she was the pivotal person in my journey to becoming an animal advocate. So yeah, we'll get into it all, but she was amazing.
Well, something that I never knew, and I've already learned something new today about Christine, is the poetry. Like, I knew she was an artist, a great artist. I knew she was like a kick-ass animal rights activist. Never knew about the poetry, so I'm going to look into that.
I didn't know that she had a PhD, so we both learned something already.
Okay, we've still got so much more to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my goodness. I could do show and tell for you because I had a look at some of her books today. It would be hard to see, but Walking Without Elephants is one of her poetry books, and with her artistry, her painting of an elephant on the cover. So yeah,
beautiful. Yes, there's so much to dive into. But first, how did you both first come to know Christine?
Back in 1975, I was living and working in Melbourne, and I used to do volunteer work on the weekends. And the people I was volunteering with at the Wilderness Society knew of my passion for animals, this need to do something. I couldn't articulate it. Anyway, somebody came there to the shop and said, you have to read this book that's just come out by Professor Peter Singer. And it was the book that has changed countless lives around the world, started so much. And I bought the book and I read the first 2 chapters on my way home, and that was it. That was my epiphany. And I believe the same thing happened to Christine when she read his book. And the momentum that came from reading Peter's extraordinary book motivated Chris to start animal liberation in New South Wales in the Rocks in 1976. I was, as I said, living and working in Melbourne, so I knew Glenys and a handful of core activists back then. But I obviously had heard of Chris, and we did communicate quite a bit. And so, yeah, I obviously throughout the decades got to know her a lot better, but that was my intro.
And what about you, Glenys?
I came to the party a little bit later than that, but again, it was Peter's book that actually made me understand things. But I have to say that the Chris's influence was before I'd even met her. I was in 1980, I know it was in October 1980, that I was sitting down to eat a roast chicken dinner. Something we didn't normally do. My housemates didn't usually have chicken, and so it was unusual. But anyway, I was watching 60 Minutes, current affairs program, and Chris appeared in the middle of a battery hen facility and was talking about the battery cage issue. And that was news to me. And I wrongly, as many people still do, I think, thought, oh, chickens, layer hens, the same thing. They weren't, of course, but that's not relevant really, except to say that night I decided that I had to change my life. I'd read Peter Singer's book, but I hadn't quite exactly taken that step. I was so close to it. That tipped me over. And so I and my partner at the time, my husband at the time also, we decided we wouldn't eat animals anymore. And that was it. That was it in October 1980. So much more came from that later, which we'll go into. But I met Chris later with as she and Peter founded Animals Australia, as it's now called.
Wow, that's just, it's incredible when you hear back to the history of everything. And of course, in the 70s in Australia, it was all pretty much sort of starting fresh and new. So, of course, it had been happening over in the UK in the 50s and 60s. So it did take a little bit of time to come to Australia. We always seem to be a little bit backward behind everyone. But can you set the scene for us? Because it was like the mid-1970s in Australia. So was there much going on with the animal rights community back then? Because I think that you guys were pretty much the forerunners to everything happening here in Australia.
When I shared with my work colleagues what was happening in my heart and soul and mind, that they became probably one of my best allies in the worst possible way. They would ridicule me and constantly argue with me, everything. And so I just vowed that I would read everything I possibly could to make sure that I had the right answers. I didn't want to be wrong once and therefore be discredited. So back in the 70s, in Australia, as you quite rightly point out, there wasn't a lot happening, but the effect of Peter Singer's book was so incredible, just so profound. And Glenys and I met, Robin Sullivan, Janine Berdue, Cheryl Forrest Smith, an amazing barrister called Graham McEwen, just a little coterie of us. And I tell you what, it was like a lifesaver for me meeting these beautiful people who understood. So back in the mid-70s, it was hard to even get vegetarian food. The word vegan hadn't been coined back then, and people were very scathing, loudly, rudely scathing about vegetarians. Over to you, Glenys.
Talk about vegetarian food. Don't get me started. I recall at the time and realising that they really didn't know how to cook vegetarian. But I do recall the sanitarium tins of sausages, which yeah, and nut meat, I think, as well. And so there wasn't a lot. You really needed to start from scratch. But just in regard to what was happening back then, as I say, I came to it a little bit later, but what I do know is that there was quite a backlash. There was a fear, if you like, within particularly the farming industry, but then the agricultural departments, regulators of those industries as well. And it was a knee-jerk reaction. We see it now with backlashes against changes, of course, but it was particularly big then. And I have to say that that set the tone, if you like, to be a polarised debate at the time, which was not something we would have wanted, but of course it was very early days, and so people, including those who were farming animals or using them in the rodeos, whatever the exploitation was, animals in research, they were really reactive to the new animal protection movement, and often just called animal rights movement, which I'm sure it is, but that was a bit of a dirty word at the time. It actually sparked a real a review of legislation in Australia, but not in a good way. That is, new animal protection acts and in states, and codes of practice that were pretty much written by the industry. And so sadly that laid a foundation of defence of the existing, particularly factory farming, but it was broader than that. So it was a difficult time, and it was a difficult time to get publicity as well for the issues, because it was seen as a marginal issue. We tried to change that, and we did start to change that, and we've certainly over time done that. But I'd have to say, when you think back, it was, as Lynda's indicated, a relatively small, a very small movement, let's face it, and we felt we were up against it.
Yeah, and even despite all that, and I remember that 60 Minutes as well, Glenys, it was so powerful, with Chris going into places that people who have the welfare of animals at the very core of their beings, she was the first person to go in and make that public. And she was also one of the first people to make live export known to Australians about the cruelty. And she fought to get vets on board. She and Paddy Mark did the first protests in Victoria about live transport, and I think there is quite an infamous photo of Chris being picked up and hurled over the side of a ship. I mean, a few of us were aware of that photograph, and so it boggles my mind just how many other things about Chris and her courage and she's an amazing human being that we didn't know about, that we'll never know about. I mean, maybe we can sit down with Jeremy, her husband, who is also a remarkable person, and see if we can't draw more out of him, because
if you're able to, that would be excellent, because we can overlay some on the podcast as you're both talking. But we do have a copy of the photo of her being thrown off the ship. Glenys shared it at the Animal Justice Awards recently, and yeah, just such an amazing photo that really shows she was not afraid to do whatever it took to get the word out there about animal suffering.
I remember seeing that photo and just looking at it and going, oh, wow, someone's being thrown overboard. And then Glenys told the story, and it's like, oh, my goodness, that's so amazing.
Sorry, I was going to say, she's very courageous. Just to add to that, one of the other things that she did in the 70s, and or early 80s, but actually went out to wool producer regional areas and had town hall meetings with them and had to be defensive in that they were very triggered by someone such as an animal rights person talking about their practices. Chris, in about that time, I'm not sure of the date exactly, but wrote a wonderful book called Pulling the Wool, a play on wool growing, and talked about the flight of sheep in Australia, in the sheep industries, in the wool industry, in the live export of sheep industry. And it is terrific. And it was great academic work as well as an advocacy work.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. She sure has done so much in her lifetime.
Did you know that most of our listeners aren't subscribed yet?
If you're enjoying the conversation and believe these stories deserve to be heard, make sure you're subscribed.
It's a free and easy way to help us grow and keep these conversations going.
I wanted to take us back a little bit. You mentioned that she founded Animal Liberation after being inspired by Peter Singer's book. And then she also was integral in starting this federation of groups, the Australian Federation of Animal Societies, which is now Animals Australia. So can you tell us about, what prompted her to start this group and what animal protection issues were the focus?
Peter and Chris, my understanding is that they had a meeting in Sydney at one stage, and Chris had not long before that been written to or been to see the current Treasurer of Australia at the time about tax deductibility for organisations. She obviously talked to the government about other things as well, but about the fact that these emerging groups, advocacy groups, really needed some support and should be supported. She was told at the time, the feedback to her was that they couldn't really contemplate that. There's so many different small groups, but if they formed together and came as a unit, then that might help. So that was one part of the story that I understand it. And so that and other reasons, meaning unity and therefore power and unity, was recognised by Chris and Peter at the time as really necessary. And so, they together suggested that a federation of groups, bringing all of the disparate groups, wildlife groups, at the animal liberation groups that had been formed through the late 70s in most states and territories, to all come together. And so it was some 33 groups that gathered at Monash University, where Peter was a professor at the time, in, I think it was July 1980, and they formed the Australian Federation of Animal Societies with the sort of issues that we collectively went on with.
So what was the sort of main focus back then on the animal advocacy work? Was there a particular one focus or two focuses, or was there a broad range of areas that you were trying to cover?
It was broad, but having said that, the very first policies from that first meeting in 1980 was that they should have a policy against live animal export from Australia, and they talked particularly about factory farming, so the most intensive methods that were being used. After that, of course, there were, annual meetings, and an executive a committee was put together. They formed policies on many other issues. But of course, again, it was very difficult to bring campaigning to the fore. I do recall that one of the first leaflets, and they were the thing at the time, leaflets were put together by the Federation, even though other groups had been working on it, was on mulesing. Clearly, one of the Chris Townend's key issues to do with the wool industry, the mulesing, and people probably listening to the podcast realise that's cutting the skin away from the backside of lambs to reduce fly strike, but a very painful thing. And so that was one of the first issues. But yeah, across the board, Peter's book, of course, while factory farming is at the fore, it covered most of the major areas of exploitation in Australia.
It's really exciting and inspiring for me as someone who only read Peter's book maybe 10 years ago, to think about how it all started in the 70s based off of Peter's book and the inspiration that had collectively for the community. And also just to hear how some of the issues that we're facing today in the animal rights community, and also the animal protection issues that we're fighting for, there's been so many people before us who have been fighting for these things as well. And it's nice to just know that there's that camaraderie through the generations as well.
But I do love the fact that you were instrumental in pulling, and Chris was instrumental in pulling so many organisations together. It does sadden me somewhat nowadays where we have fragmented organisations and people who are fighting over things that we shouldn't be fighting over. We should be putting the animals first and foremost in what's going on and come together, because I remember up in Queensland when I was with AJP and Coast to Coast Animal Friends, but whenever any of the other groups would put something on, we'd all be there to support. When we were there putting stuff on, everybody came in to support. And it just seems since COVID, it has become quite fractured, which is sad. And I'm just really hoping that people start looking at unity again and bringing everybody back together again.
I remember back in the day when we could get people marching through the CBD in their thousands. It was extraordinary. And we would end up congregating with all of our dogs and other bubs underneath the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We used to have the Hare Krishnas with us, beating their drums. It was just a myriad of different people, different groups, all coming together for this collective cause. And I don't know what's happened. I mean, apart from some transparencies march through the city, which I was involved in a couple of years ago, and I was truly gobsmacked that you could close down part of the CBD in Melbourne, unheard of in Sydney, and the trams would stop. The drivers would be just sat there in their driving bit waiting for all the activists to come through. I've never experienced anything like that before. So bravo, Melbourne.
I did. I went down for the first Dominion march, and I remember, I was gobsmacked at how many people were there. It was just packed. And yes, they shut down the whole of Melbourne. But I remember at one point, because I was running backwards and forwards, trying to take photos, get videos and do those sorts of things. But I remember at one point I was at the back and everybody was walking up this hill and they were going down the other hill. And as I was coming up the hill, I could just hear this chanting. I get goosebumps like right now, remembering it. Yeah, it was all the echoing of the chanting was coming over the hill. It was just the most amazing feeling to see so many people coming together. I just wish we could do that again.
But also so much advocacy is moving online too, which is interesting. Just a different avenue to get the word out there, which is important. But it's also, I think it's as individuals in the movement, in order to have that reinvigoration and that passion, it's so nice to have those community events where you can feel the support of everyone around you for the same goal.
Well, this is why I think it's important to be looking back at the impact that Chris had on the movement, because we've got to learn from the past. And Mackenzie knows where I'm probably going with this, but I love this podcast called Radicals and Revolutionaries. And they talk about everything that happened in the 50s and 60s in the UK and the starts of the whole animal rights movement.
The hunt sabs.
Yeah, the hunt sabs, the whole vivisection stuff, the trying to get dolphins out of these horrible situations. And you're listening to these guys and they're talking, and it's pre any sort of viral, stuff going online. They were just doing it for the passion. And I really want to make sure that everybody starts to learn from the past experience, because as they always say, let's make animal rights radical again. And I think we really need to do that. We need to start thinking outside of the box and going back and studying Chris and everything that she did and go, yeah, we got to empower the movement again.
There's so many things that, there's no point having, it is what it is. Chris passed away last year, all too young, too sadly. But it is Animal Liberation's 50th this year, and I would have loved for her to have been there, to have witnessed how far we came as a result of her work. And one thing that she was, I mean, mulesing was a big passion for Chris. And as Glenys said, she wrote, the book. She wrote many books, but she did write one entirely on pulling the wool. And she was alive to bear witness to the fact that many top fashion designers will not buy Australian wool that has been mules. So she thankfully she was able to bear witness to that, and other things that changed, that heavens, not as fast as we would have liked, but she saw, well, I mean, the word vegan has become it's eclipsed vegetarian. It's just like, what is vegetarian? People just become vegans. And so she was able to see some of the effects of the work that she began. And I'm very, very happy that she was able to. And Jeremy is continuing with a lot of her work still, the work that they did together in India.
Yeah, please tell us more about Chris's work in India. What led her down that path?
I think it was to some extent the frustration and the difficulties in Australia at the time. As I said, there was quite a backlash through the 80s particularly. So I think that's one take on it when I read her book about it. But having said that, I think that she had a calling. She saw the issues in India and felt that she, and then Jeremy along with her, could assist, particularly at the Darjeeling shelter at the time. And I think that she just thought she could make an impression, and she did, and they did.
So my understanding is they started some animal shelters and animal rescues for stray dogs. Is that correct?
If I tried to remember everything that Chris achieved, I wouldn't have. Anyway, so I can actually read this about. In 1990, she was asked by its European funder to undertake an inspection of an animal shelter known as Help in Suffering, located in Jaipur, India. As a result of her visit to Help in Suffering, she was, in that same year, appointed its joint managing trustee, which was a voluntary position, which was everything Jeremy and Chris did with helping animals was all done and voluntary. And they both lived so humbly in India, like no running water, everything. So she managed Help in Suffering until 2007, and Jeremy joined her in 1992, and she remained a patron of Help in Suffering. And as Glenys said, in 1993, she established Darjeeling Goodwill Animal Shelter Trust, as a result of which came into being Kalimpong Animal Shelter and Darjeeling Animal Shelter, both being in the district of Darjeeling in the Indian state of West Bengal. And they were able to branch out. Dogs were their primary focus to begin with, and dissects and return, getting vet help for these dogs, getting rabies down. That was a big killer of dogs and human beings. And because of her profoundly extraordinary work, they were able to get the numbers of rabies victims down. I mean, that if they just, in inverted commas, if they just done that in their lives, that would have been extraordinary. But this is on top of everything else she did.
Truly remarkable.
What other, seriously, this lady has done so much, and I don't know that we're going to be able to fit everything in on all her successes, but what are some of the other successes in Chris's life that she had a hand in?
She continued with all of the campaigns throughout time that she'd started in the 70s. And I was just so pleased to just before she passed, when she wasn't very well, to let her know about finally the state agriculture ministers agreeing to the phase out of battery caging. We all know it should have happened decades ago, but the very fact that finally it was, they'd signed on the line, I was so pleased to have passed that on. Jeremy passed that on to her, and she was so thrilled. So thankfully she saw some of those campaigns come to some sort of a conclusion.
And Glenys, it was such an honour to work with her on the Animals Australia board and to get to know her differently, more intensely. It was just a glorious experience to have some years of really, amazing time with her. And if it's okay with you, I'll tell you some other things. Glenys has spoken about pulling the wool. She also published other non-fiction books, including In Defence of Living Things, which I read about 17 times, A Voice for Animals, and in her 2007 biography, Christine's Ark, which was written by journalist John Little and published by Macmillan, and Moti, an Indian elephant, was published in India in 2014. And as mentioned, she held a doctorate in poetry from the University of Sydney, and her poetry collection, which is beautiful, was published in 2015, called Walking with Elephants. And as we've discussed at the head of the podcast, she was also an amazing artist. She held 5 solo art exhibitions, and obviously she used her art as a way of drawing attention to the plight of animals. She was, I'm reading all of this, and Glenys, you talk like she's done so much. It's eye-popping.
Yeah. But of course Peter, in the history of Animals Australia, she and Peter were so instrumental in bringing people together. But I have to say to you, back in those, we were talking about the really early days, you'll realise that there wasn't any internet. Email wasn't even around. I think there were faxes, but,
yes, faxes.
But really we would communicate by letter. That is a federation of groups by letter, and by STD phone calls. Do you know what STD phone calls are?
No.
Long distance phone calls that you had to pay by the minute. Okay. So it was a very different world. And so she was in Sydney, we were in Melbourne. And so we didn't know each other as well, except for the annual meetings of what was called the Australian Federation of Animal Societies at the time, which was really important timing. And interestingly, the meetings that we had morphed into 2-day affairs, where it was more like a conference, and that actually morphed into the Animal Activist Forum eventually as well. So we have quite a history going back for very many years. But I have to say that as Lynda has just indicated, and then of course she went to India, which was even harder to communicate with there. And so it was really only when I invited Christine to be the first and inaugural chair of Animals Australia when we changed our legal status and needed a board as opposed to an executive committee. And she was the first chair. And so, I and Lynda, who was also on the board of Animals Australia and is still, really got to know her and realise her gentle way, certainly as a chair. She was so humble.
Yeah, humble, tentative.
Humble. And self-effacing, and so her leadership style was cooperative, and throughout the years she absolutely encouraged other leaders to come forward, and I think that's such a characteristic that I admire in Chris.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling the tears. It's like,
I know, it's such a privilege to have this conversation, honestly. Yeah. So we've already established that Chris was absolutely amazing, but she was recognised at the Animal Justice Awards in 2022. She was recognised with the Peter Singer Award for Lifetime Achievement, which is very fitting considering how Peter Singer had such an influence on her and the foundation of these groups in Australia. What do you think it meant to her to receive that recognition?
Oh, I still recall the video acceptance that she and Jeremy and Chris was not very well at that stage either, and needed significant support. And so they filmed a video thank you, I suppose, but acceptance in the lounge room of their home in Sydney, or in the Blue Mountains, it would have been by then. And it was just, again, humble, but I could see how important it was to both of them, of course. Yeah. And I think it meant a tremendous amount. And this last forum that we had in February of this year, where Chris was again memorialised, if you like, as you mentioned earlier, Mackenzie. I spoke with Jeremy after that and to advise him, of course. Well, I think I might have tipped him off earlier. And he was just so thrilled, as were their boys, their two sons as well, to know that Chris had been recognised by her peers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that actually brings us to our next question for you, Glenys, because would you like to share some exciting news for the 2027 Animal Justice Awards?
Yes, the Animal Justice Awards, of course, growing in importance and significance to us all. Animals Australia has been a sponsor of one of the awards for some years, and the Effective Advocacy Award, a $5,000 award to an advocate who is doing wonderful things and intends to continue on. So it's an important award, and we're very pleased to be part of it. After Chris's passing, the Animals Australia board discussed how we could continue to celebrate Chris's life. We already once, when she stepped down as chair, named our boardroom after it. It's the Christine Townend boardroom at Animals Australia. So, but after Chris had passed, we thought it important to further honour her. And from 2027, the next awards, and I'm just going to read it because I keep getting the title wrong, but we have decided to rename the Animals Australia Award. It will now be the Animals Australia Christine Townend Award for Visionary Advocacy. That's
just amazing. But can you also tell there's one other little thing there?
A little tweak, whereas it's been $5,000 up until now over the last 3 or 4 years or so, it's going to be now $10,000 from 2027 onwards. So yeah, we'll be certainly, the Animal Justice Foundation, of course, will be wanting people to nominate for that award, and we'll be so pleased that Chris's name, her legacy, the importance of her work, and the fond way we remember her will be assisted by having this award every year from here on in.
Yes. I'd just like to say that the nominations will be opening fairly soon for the 2027 awards. So everybody think carefully of who you want to nominate, because we want to get as many people nominated as possible. And even if you don't win, if you haven't won in the past, or be presented with an award in the past, please still get people nominating, because who knows, you could win next time. So yeah, please get in there and start nominating as soon as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a beautiful way to honour Chris's legacy. And I just wanted to mention as well, you mentioned the acceptance video, and I'll put a link in the show notes, so if anyone wants to watch it, they can. Hey, a quick break from the episode to let you know that the Vegan Compass podcast now has merch.
You can finally rep the show with our new tees, hoodies, tote bags and mugs.
It's the perfect way to support the show and spark a few conversations.
Just head to our website or check the link in the show notes to grab yours today.
All right, back to the episode. We touched on the story of her being thrown off the live export ship. Chris is remembered as being determined, but also you said, a quiet achiever. I would love to know what were some other stories that demonstrate her courage.
Oh gosh, there's so many. I think just starting a group in Sydney in 1976, with the way Australia was at the time, was the most courageous thing she ever did, obviously with Peter's support, but then wonderful people there. And of course, Lynda continues that legacy, being the CEO still of Animal Live New South Wales. So, yeah. But can you think of other things, Lynda? There's so many.
She used to make me laugh, and we've still got the minutes books from those early days in the rocks. And it's just an adorable thing to think that there were 6 people who came to the office in the rocks. They're from humble beginnings, and they had to fundraise to get an Olivetti electric typewriter, which was a really big deal in those days. And it's all minuted. And just okay. So, and she told me that one day this stranger knocked on the door, and they were not sure what was going on, but he had a brown paper bag, quite large brown paper bag, and he came in and deposited an enormous amount of cash on the table. Now, these days, you'd be up for all sorts of, but anyway, I'm sure they bought more Olivetti typewriters. Just stuff like that. You can't make this stuff up. Just so many anecdotes. Plus, all of the really hard stuff that she did, like she witnessed kosher slaughter, halal slaughter. Just, I don't know how she did it, quite frankly. I just don't know. And, she was invited on the boards of things like the CSIRO and many other government boards that she was on, which is pretty radical, considering the as Glenys said, animal rights people back in the 70s weren't exactly flavour of the month or the year or the decade. But she did it in her very steadfast, gentle, quiet, intelligent way. She just kept moving forward, and that is so admirable. She never gave up, and I love that.
So Christine dedicated her life to confront animal suffering and put herself right in the forefront of so many different campaigns and situations, and horrible, seeing the worst of the worst. And, we understand the toll it can take on it, but did it ever seem to take a personal toll on her?
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. And as I say, I got the inkling that some of that was why she went to India. Mind you, the challenges there, were probably bigger, but they were different. And there's some frustration here. There was some frustration for all of us, and it continues to this day, I'd suggest. But she'd done so much so soon. So I think that it did get to her. Having said that, it did not stop her. I mean, the very fact that when I rang her and said, Chris, would you be the chair? And this was in 2017. So we are talking, what is that? That's 40 years after she started. She didn't hesitate. Except she said, are you very sure? As in, do you really want me?
No, right?
But of course she said yes. So she wanted to continue to contribute. So I've no doubt that it took its toll, but not one that would deter her from what she believed she needed to do.
So courageous. We're starting to round out the episode, and so I guess pull out some key things from Christine's life that the rest of us can take into the future of animal advocacy. So I would love to know how you would summarize Christine to younger activists who never had the chance to know her.
She used to describe herself in some of her earlier writings, or rather it was said of her when she first began this by industry people that she was just a housewife from the Northern Beaches. Well, she showed them. And so she took it upon herself, she was such an articulate, remarkable voice for animals, and she had the courage to go where others had never been before. She would not have her voice denied, whatever the industry was. And okay, I think this is a really important thing for younger activists. I see so many, and look, I understand it. Glenys understands it, so I'm sure you do as well. You can't, you read a book by Professor Singer, it's a light bulb, it explodes in you mentally, and it is inexplicable as to why other people don't have that reaction. It's frustrating. It's a lot of things. And I see many young activists who either burn out or become very angry, become a bit martyred to the cause. It's not about you. It's really not about you. It's about this movement, and it's about the animals. And so you just kind of got to get over yourself a bit, really, and just know that every foot forward is another brick, of progression, and just keep going and don't be defeated. I mean, we need people. We don't need people to burn out because they're angry or whatever negative thing befalls them. We need people who can be like Chris, who, for all of those decades, faced with what she bravely faced, she never gave in. She never gave up. She just kept going. And it was never about Chris. It was always about the animals. So that's my humble 2 cents worth.
I'm sure it took more than 2 seconds, which is understandable given what Chris has done.
Cents, I said it's worth.
I think that what I took, when I look back, Chris was always really well prepared, just as we talked about her writing a whole book on the wool industry, for example. And she researched, she knew things, but she just didn't know it just from research, which, there wasn't the same access as is now to references and such things. But she also talked to industry, meaning talked to individuals, and they would talk to her just as we as Lynda's mentioned, she went into quite a lot of and saw quite a lot of terrible things. That's because she had access. She wasn't going in, it wasn't an open rescue or undercover. She actually was invited in because of her gentle nature, because maybe it was because they thought she was just a housewife from the northern suburbs. Maybe they didn't see the steely person behind it, perhaps not. But regardless of why, the thing is that she was able to access information, and not just from books or other sources, but rather from farmers and others. And that was really important because it gave her such credibility. And then the way she talked about it was also cognizant of the lifestyles that people that are trapped, I say trapped in industries that have been normalised by our community for so many decades. So I do think that she had that ability to cut through and to be gentle with those who would otherwise be called opponents. I do think that's an important thing, to really think about how to effect change by being able to properly discuss things or influence decision makers. Sorry, that sounds a little, I hope it doesn't sound preachy, I have to say.
No, you've actually answered my next question, which is about being an effective animal advocate and strategist. So you just beautifully summed that up so well. I never met Chris personally. The only interaction I ever had with her was through the Animal Justice Awards.
Yeah, same.
And I knew a little bit about her history, but it's just amazing to hear just a small snippet of Chris's life. And we really probably should talk to Jeremy, I think, as well at some point. And get him on, because he would have a whole other insight, plus of course carrying on her work. But question for both of you, so you can work out who wants to take this first. What lessons from Christine's life should activists carry forward today?
Yeah, I you know what I would say is to be gentle on yourself and gentle on those who you need to influence, wish to influence, so that they can actually help change the world, because we actually can't do it from just one side of the fence.
Yeah, so true. Wow, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you both. And like you said, Rick, I wish I knew Christine when she was alive. And to be honest, it's sad, but the truth is you don't always reflect or appreciate what someone's achieved until after they've passed. So it's definitely a regret that I didn't pay more attention or get to know her life's work more, especially since I had that access to her through winning the Animal Justice Awards. But it's beautiful to speak to both of you and hear more about her. And I feel like I do know her a little bit now. So that's really nice. And hopefully everyone who's listening can take these stories forward into their own advocacy as well.
Well, I'd also like to see people going and reading her books.
Yes,
and reading more about her life, like her memoir. I think that would be an amazing book to read. And research I think we need to research the history of animal rights in Australia. And somebody needs to actually write a book about it, so no, not me. But I really do think, we do need to research what happens in Australia, because not enough activists know the history of animal rights in Australia. So I think it's an important thing, because of course that was pre-internet, pre-selfies, Instagram fame or Facebook fame. It was people just out there doing it, and doing it because that was in their heart. I'm not saying modern activists don't have it in their heart, but these people were hardcore.
Yeah. And I was also thinking too, how much we've come in terms of overcoming sexism as well. It's still there, but the fact that Christine was a woman at the forefront of this movement, deemed just a housewife, and boy did she show them otherwise. But it's hard for us to comprehend now what those struggles would have been like for her, because it's not something that I personally have experienced to the extent that she would have as well. So there's probably that whole other layer of challenge that she faced that's hard for someone like me to comprehend.
Well, folks, oh my goodness, what an episode. I can't thank you two wonderful people enough. As I said at the beginning, you two are such great inspirations for me. I love you both so much. And thank you so much for sharing just that part of Christine's life and giving us a chance to honour her memory. So, folks, it does bring us to the end of another wonderful episode. We thank you for being here. We thank Lynda, we thank Glenys, and of course, I thank Mackenzie. And we look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let us know by leaving a comment and share this episode with a friend.